It's Monday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're going to talk about something that Steelers fans are starting to get really nervous about, and that's the T.J. Watt situation. I'll bring it back to reality while also answering questions from you on the Locked On Steelers call-in line. It's all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasts and on YouTube, podcasting apps, and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. All right, Steelers fans, let's dive into several things here. I wanted to start off by taking more of your calls as we head through the rest of this summer. It's getting hotter, and I appreciate y'all keeping up the phone calls coming in. You can always call in our call-in line, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get on the show. And we've been receiving a lot of TJ Watt questions, and I mean a lot of TJ Watt questions. I've not been focusing on it too much because we've addressed this a lot, but I figured it's been a minute, so let's dive back into the TJ Watt contract situation now. If you're needing a refresher, currently the situation is TJ Watt is on the final year of his current deal. So the Steelers typically would want to sign him to a future contract. Right now, he has a $30.4 million cap hit against the Steelers. Myles Garrett earlier this offseason signed a new deal that made him a $40 million per year on average signee for the Cleveland Browns. TJ Watt ultimately probably wants something along that lines, probably a little bit higher, 41, 42, maybe even $43 million on average per year. And there are some people who feel like that is way too much money to be spending on a edge rusher in his early 30s. But I've been pointing out, Alan Saunders has pointed out, Nick Farabaugh, several of our guests have pointed out, TJ Watt is still one of the best defensive players in the NFL. And that number that you hear when you hear it go 40 plus million, it's not the same kind of what 40 plus million meant even just a couple years ago because of how much the NFL's salary cap has skyrocketed. That's what $40 million today is like $28.5 million about 5 years ago. And for the reason I said that, that's the average amount of money per year that TJ Watt got back then. And so when it comes to salary cap space, it's still taking up around 14 to 15% of a team's salary cap, which is perfectly fine if you're keeping a premier edge rusher, which is what TJ Watt still is in today's NFL. But let's get some thoughts from some of the fans that have been kind of just waiting around for this thing to happen because TJ Watt didn't show up at OTAs, nor did he show up at minicamp. And now there's the question hanging over, how is training camp going to go down? How are these negotiations going to go down? We start with Buddha out in Harmerville.
Hey, Chris, this is Buddha up in Harmerville, surviving that U.S. Open traffic. One quick question. Second biggest fan. My wife makes me wait to watch the podcast. Does Omar Khan just tell TJ Watt we're not as dumb as the Raiders or the Browns to overpay you? And here's what you get. Take it or leave it. Hoping for a response. Thanks a lot, bud. Bye.
Thank you, Buddha. And as always, you can call into the show at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep a question under a minute. So a few things here. One, I don't think that the Browns or the Raiders overpaid for Myles Garrett or Max Crosby. When you look at comparatively to what edge rushers have been making percentage-wise of the salary cap is what you should be looking at, not necessarily the raw how much money this player is going to make on average per year, which is what I think people have gotten trained to. But we have to adjust every year, especially right now, as the NFL's salary cap keeps skyrocketing because the NFL keeps making more and more and more money because they keep adding games to the schedule. They keep getting new TV deals, new streaming deals, all these things. They're adding up to more money for the players. And when more money is going into the players, we have to then understand what $40 million even looks like compared to what it would have looked like, a few years ago. And it's a different thing. So I don't think that they necessarily overpaid when looking at that. And I have to admit, it took me some time to adjust to this myself. At first, when I saw raw numbers, I was like, oh yeah. But then I reminded myself, like, wait a second, these numbers are different now. The salary cap is different, is very different right now. It risen by, I think, over $100 million in the last 5 or 6 years. I forget the exact number, but I don't think it's an overpay there. But to get to the rest of your question here, talking about will Omar Khan get to a point where he puts his foot down on TJ Watt and he says, take it or leave it? I don't think it should get to that point. I think the good negotiators don't let get to ultimatum status, because when you get to ultimatum status where it's like, I am demanding that you make a decision or else, that's when things can often turn to a head. And I don't think it's going to get there for the Steelers and TJ Watt. I think TJ Watt wants to play for Pittsburgh. They want him to play for Pittsburgh. As I've talked about, I've talked to Denzel Martin, his position coach, Alex Highsmith, his fellow edge rusher, other teammates, Mike Tomlin. Everyone's been in contact with TJ Watt. They've been talking. I don't think it's at that level where they're going to offer an ultimatum. And I think the only way that would happen is if, like, the Steelers offered TJ Watt a very lucrative contract, and he just like turned it away and was kind of disrespectful with treating it that way. And I don't know that TJ Watt would do that to the Steelers. So I think that's the only way that would happen. But let's keep taking questions, because James from Waynesburg didn't appreciate how TJ Watt passed up on these practices when the Steelers are trying to adapt some younger players to the defense, and particularly players in the defense that could be playing next to him. Here's James.
Hey, Chris, this is James Richard from Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, 50 miles south of Pittsburgh. Anyhow, I don't like the fact that TJ Watt was not in minicamp, and I don't like the fact that he may not be part of the first week or two of training camp. Derek Harmon is going to be a big part of the future of the Steelers, and he's going to be lining up beside TJ. And I think it's important for him to suck as much knowledge out of TJ as possible during this time. I sure hope his contract extension doesn't draw out too much longer. Hope it gets done quickly. Tell me how important you think that is for him to be spending time with TJ preseason.
I think it'll help. First of all, thank you, James, for your question. As always, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. Of course, it will help to get the timing and everything down, but that's something that's also going to come more so as they get to line up each other in games. They get that experience together there too. But I also think it's important to remember that, like, this kind of stuff happens when players are in negotiations, and it works fine. Remember, in 2021, the Steelers, had to renegotiate with him then for his big deal that he got that led, his last big contract extension. And I think that was the year they had some new pieces on the defensive line because Stephon Tuitt retired, and they had some things, and it was fine. TJ Watt went and had 22.5 sacks that year. So, tying Michael Strahan's all-time single season sack record. So I don't think it's that bad yet. I do think it's important in training camp for them to get that work in, and that'll be something that'll be nice for them to see, and I think it will happen. But I think the rule here that I think that people need to know about, where I think the Steelers do put their foot down, in the sense, if you're looking for somewhere where they are kind of terse, the Steelers traditionally do not negotiate with players until they when they're doing holdouts until they show up. That's like their rule. Hines Ward, that rule worked for Jerome Bettis, Hines Ward, everybody. That's just how they operate, and so they don't play not showing up. So if TJ Watt doesn't show up for training camp, that could make things weirder and weirder, and we'll see if it gets there. But I don't think it will get to that point. I think that TJ Watt will show up in training camp, might do a little bit of holding in there, and then in that instance, or once that happens, I think the negotiations begin. They'll get closer to some numbers, and then they'll reveal something. But I do think that when that happens, everyone's going to put this behind them. They're going to be fine. And he's going to help. He's going to help with Derek Harmon. I think that's going to be a big part of this too, is he's going to develop a rapport with him. And then we'll see how things go from there. So that being said, I do agree that, it could have been beneficial for him to be at OTAs and minicamp. But there were plenty of OTAs and practices and spring practices that, like, Troy Polamalu, Ben Roethlisberger, guys like those missed over their years. And they didn't have the biggest impact on the Steelers season by them doing that at that time. But still, I think to your point, when talking about TJ Watt, you want to get things going, and they're talking about moving him around more. Be nice to see them working on that at this stage of the season. So won't say that, you can't want for TJ Watt to, it's bad. I'm not going to say it's bad for you to want TJ Watt to be able to practice more situations or come in earlier and do this stuff. But I also think that it's much more of a regularity of how this situation is getting handled in the NFL than people realize. So I think TJ Watt's going to sign. He's going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler for life. And this will be something that gets forgotten because we've been here several times before with covering several different players. And if their players are very important to the organization, they stick around. And everything's been indicated. TJ Watt is very important to the organization. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, got more of your questions to answer, specifically because there are some people who do or don't believe in the plan to go get a quarterback in 2026 based off of the other teams that will also be trying to do the same thing. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control of your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial and command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. If you're like me, you probably have a lot of subscriptions and place a lot of orders online. Over time, that adds up to be a lot of money. Well, with Monarch Money, you can keep a close watch on all that spending in an easy-to-see, organized, and convenient presentation. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL.com at monarchmoney.com to get 50% off your first order. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year only at Monarch Money. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We were talking about some dueling questions last segment, and I think this segment also counts for dueling questions. So this regards to the Steelers' plans to draft a quarterback in the first round of the 2026 NFL draft, which will be in Pittsburgh, by the way, and being aggressive to do so, planning for it, trying to get inside looks on who it'll be. I think all those types of things it's excited to get here about. But there are some people who think that the Steelers are probably going to finish, and I think this too. I think they'll probably finish, either just in the playoffs or just missing the playoffs, or a team that could be decent in the playoffs. I think they could be in there. But if they're doing any of those, they're not in prime position to go get that quarterback. So they're going to need to trade up. And so with that, let's get to some of the questions here. And there's some people that think, oh yeah, they'll just trade up and it's going to be that easy. And Jerry from Hastings, Pennsylvania, wants you know he doesn't think it will be that easy. But here's Jerry to tell it for you for himself.
Hi, Chris. This is Jerry from Hastings, PA. The National Football League only has a handful of franchise quarterbacks in the whole league, which leaves a lot of teams looking. And there's a bunch of quarterback experiments going to happen around the league this year, such as the Jets, Giants, Cleveland, Minnesota, Seattle, New Orleans. Miami's one concussion away from needing a quarterback. Atlanta's not a given. I just think people should tone down this idea that it's a done deal, that the Steelers can move up and get one of those maybe 5 guys that are coming out next year. By the time that draft's over next year, the Steelers might be hoping that Will Howard is as good a quarterback as some of the fans think he is now. I'll hang up and wait for your show. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for your question. As always, calling at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. So I hear you, Jerry. I hear that you think there's going to be other teams that could be in competition, and it might not just be so easy to trade up to get your franchise quarterback, because everyone's going to want to trade up and get some franchise quarterbacks. But I think that this perfectly teams up with another question we got from Buddy out in Camden, New Jersey. Buddy, question is kind of similar, but from a different angle. Here's Buddy.
Hey, Chris, this is Putty from Camden, New Jersey. The question I like to pose is, I've been doing some analysis on all the teams that need quarterbacks, and it seems like it's only 4 teams that will need quarterbacks in next year's draft, being Pittsburgh is being one of them. How far do you think that we have to trade up to get the quarterback that we want, or do you think that we will be able to stand pat at whatever position that we have in the draft to get the quarterback of the future? Thanks for answering my question. You do excellent work, Chris. Tell the guys I said, hey, Alan Saunders and the rest of the guys, I do excellent work. I watch you every day. All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, buddy. As always, calling like he did and our friend Jerry did at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. Okay, so let's look at this from where these guys are coming from. Jerry's point is that it's not going to be just so easy to just trade up. It's not like Madden where you can just be like, hey, force trade, get this done. We're moving up to the first overall pick for a first and a second. Woo, we did it. And to Jerry's point, that is true. It's not going to be so easy. There's going to be competition. There's going to be people driving up prices, and it's going to be a crazy night when that's going down. But to Buddy's point, there might not be as many quarterback suitors as people think when you look out there. So let's do a quick experiment. We look through other teams in the NFL and whether or not they'll be in the real quarterback market next season. So let's start with one team that's obviously in the quarterback market, the Saints. They don't have a quarterback. They don't have a future. They need to get it. Oh, when the Saints, they're going to be marching in. They're going to be looking for a quarterback. Now, next up on the list is the Browns, and the Browns are pretty unique because they have 2 first-round picks, one of which is of the Jaguars. So with that, they basically have 2 chances to get really high picks with the Jaguars. If the Jaguars are bad, and if the Browns are bad. The Browns could be an interesting spot because they drafted 2 rookies this year at quarterback, but they're later picks, and who knows if they'll develop. And so the Browns, I don't know if they're going to be serious players in the quarterback market next year. I think, there's a chance, but I think that with all the other things they got going on, maybe they're not as big of players there. So let's keep moving down the line. Titans are out. They just drafted Cam Ward. I'd say the Giants are out because they just drafted Jackson Dart. So I think that's not going to be on the table now. The Jets could be interesting because when you look at the Jets and you look at their history with Aaron Rodgers and how everything's gone, and they've signed Justin Fields, maybe the Jets want to get aggressive. So I'll give them a maybe, like I'll give Cleveland a maybe, because there's always a chance Cleveland could change things up there. So now we have 1 definite team and 2 maybes there. But will the Panthers be looking for a quarterback? No, they got Bryce Young. Raiders, no, they just paid Geno Smith a ridiculous amount of money. Rams, maybe. The Rams are the maybe here because Matt Stafford's getting old and they could use another plan there. So maybe there. But moving down the line of other teams that could be in the Steelers' way, Dolphins, doubt it. Just with how with how Tua's situation is, I don't think they're going to be there. Patriots, they got Drake May. They're not doing all that. Seattle, maybe a Seattle team. They went and got Sam Darnold, I think, this year. And I don't think that's a good long-term solution. So I think that could be that. Cardinals, they got what's his name? They have a quarterback. I'm blanking on his name right now. But they've had a quarterback for quite some time. When it comes to that, and I cannot remember this man's name for no reason. But he was the first overall pick. And Kyler Murray. Why I could not pull that one out. I don't know. But what my point is. They got Kyler Murray. I highly doubt they're in the market. Cowboys, Dak Prescott, not in the market. Bears, Caleb Williams, not in the market. Vikings, J.J. McCarthy, not in the market. Texans, C.J. Stroud, not in the market. Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield, not in the market. Broncos, the guy they drafted last year out of Oregon, can't remember his name right now, but not in the market. Looking at the Chargers, Justin Herbert, not in the market. Packers, Jordan Love, not in the market. Niners just paid Brock Purdy a ton of money, not in the market. Bengals got Joe Burrow, not in the market. Commanders, Jaden Daniels, not in the market. Rams again, and Rams are unique because they got 2 first-round picks, and they could go after one this season. Bills, Josh Allen, not in the market. Lions, Jared Goff, not in the market. Ravens, Lamar Jackson, not in the market. Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, not in the market. Eagles, Jalen Hurts, not in the market. So with that, you have several teams that aren't going to be in this quarterback market that you can just scratch off right now. There's some teams that you could put some possibles on, some teams you could put most likely, definitely going to pick a quarterback on. And I think that when you compare that list to the situation that the Steelers have as far as what they want to do and how they want to approach things, I think it leans more to what Buddy's trying to do and saying, hey, I think it's very doable to trade up for something here, because I don't think it's going to be as aggressive to try to do so. You're not going to get in bidding wars. You're giving up 4 first-round picks for one quarterback. But I think that's where it's going to come down to: can the Steelers make their ends? Can they get a load on who they think is the guy for them, and then figuring out how to get that guy where they can get that guy without breaking the bank. So that being said, I kind of lead more to Buddy in this situation when it comes to their approach to this. Because I think that when it comes to this, I think they're going to have the ammunition to trade up and get a quarterback. Again, I just remind people the Chiefs traded up from 27th overall to 10th overall to get Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying it's going to be taking something like that crazy, but I am going to be saying this is going to be. I think the Steelers are going to be bigger players in this market for the quarterback than people realize. I think they're going to be going after a lot. They're going to be going after any trades they can make. They want their quarterback. They're going to be making these calls, and I would not be surprised if they end up. But they need to get in the top 10. To answer your question there too, they need to get inside the top 10 of picks, and to get the quarterback that I think that they want. And I think Lenore Sellers is my guy. You may think Arch Manning. You may think Arch Manning's not going to play right away, but I think that I think the big thing for me is. If I'm looking at these teams and I'm looking how they're operating, I could really see if the Steelers, wanted to make a move to trade up to get a quarterback. I think it's very doable. I think there's a lot of teams that are in the maybe position as far as why they would want to get a quarterback, but I don't think it's going to cost, but I don't think it's going to cost a ridiculous amount of draft capital. I think it's going to be solid. It's going to be fine. But for me, I think that the Steelers, they're going to have this ammunition locked and ready to go and get the quarterback of the future who they think is that person. So we'll see how the Steelers do. We'll see if this 2026 draft does yield the results that we or the type of quarterback talent that we anticipate, and we'll see how the Steelers handle it. But we'll keep it moving here because we got other questions to answer. And this one dives back into it. This next one will dive back into a previous question asked on this podcast. I'll explain what that is and how it ties to Aaron Rodgers. All next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're going back to the phone lines to take a question from Steve in Spring Grove, PA, talking about Aaron Rodgers. Now, to key Steve up, I think he brought this back up because we had a previous question. Now, a previous question asked if Aaron Rodgers could make a run with the Steelers the way that Peyton Manning did with the Broncos and that Tom Brady did with the Buccaneers, because both were superstar MVP level quarterbacks of their eras who went to other teams and won Super Bowls with those other teams. And they were different situations. Now, again, Tom Brady was a bit different with the Buccaneers, but what's really unique about the Broncos one, and this is the one that Steve brings up here, what's really unique is Peyton Manning was not Peyton Manning of old with the Broncos. He was old Peyton Manning. He was struggling. He threw 9 touchdowns and 17 interceptions, I think, that year, if I have those numbers right. 9 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. That's not Peyton Manning from even the year before that. But injuries caught up with him. It was pretty obvious. It was why it was going to be his last year, and they happened to win a Super Bowl with Peyton Manning in that last year. And so could the Steelers get to that level? How could it get there? Listen to how Steve asked this question. I think it's very interesting, and it'll lead to some interesting insights as far as why the Steelers could or could not be competitive. But take it away, Steve.
Hey, this is Steve, Spring Grove, PA. Just a little thought. What are the chances, or who's to say that Aaron Rodgers doesn't have like a Peyton Manning-esque type 2016, 2000 or 15, 16 season Super Bowl winning I mean, Peyton didn't have arm strength, couldn't move, but he had a supporting cast. Do you think we have that supporting cast to maybe make some type of run? Hey, thanks for taking my question. Watch or listen to your show all the time. Appreciate what you do. Go Steelers.
Thanks, Steve, for your question. As always, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. So, Steve, let's go through your question here for a little bit. Now, to compare, first of all, the quarterbacks where they are. Peyton Manning was younger than Aaron Rodgers when he was in his final year at the Broncos, but compared to where Aaron Rodgers is now. But Peyton Manning was also doing a lot of injuries, and one was that neck surgery that he had that took him out of about 4 years before that, and he was so limited in this season. Father Time had caught up with him. It was a wrap, and you could kind of see it. They were benching him for Brock Osweiler, of all people. Peyton Manning got benched for Brock Osweiler. I mean, the times were a-changing. So if I was to compare him to Aaron Rodgers right now, I think Aaron Rodgers, so long as Father Time does not catch up to him, because he's also had some injuries. He was out for the season just 2 years ago with an Achilles. If Father Time doesn't catch up to Aaron Rodgers, I think there's a chance he can get better than Peyton Manning was in 2015. And not for career-wise. And that's actually an interesting debate, Peyton Manning or Aaron Rodgers. But I think there's a good chance that Aaron Rodgers comes in with more tools than the 2015 version of Peyton Manning did, because of the limitations that Peyton Manning had physically during that season. If you remember, Peyton Manning, again, 9 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. He was not killing it that year. They were kind of having to win in spite of him at times. And I don't think the Steelers will be in that position where it's like they're having to win in spite of Aaron Rodgers all the time. I think he's going to make smart throws, smart reads. I think he's going to be fine. He looked physically fine when we saw him at minicamp. So I don't think that's gonna be a problem. But so let's look at the rest of Steve's question here, because they talked about comparing the teams. So let's compare the teams by the units and see where the Steelers could be like the Broncos or could be better than the Broncos in that situation. So let's start with the receiver position. That's the obvious one where I think the Broncos went out. Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, great 1-2 punch. Steelers have DK Metcalf, but Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, not as proven. So, that's going to be an advantage that they certainly have there. But where the Steelers could claim an advantage over that team is a few other spots, particularly at the running back position. C.J. Anderson, I think, was very underrated for what he did for the Broncos at the time. But I think Jaylen Warren and Caleb Johnson especially could be better running backs than what they had on that roster in 2015. There's a chance, still got to prove it, but that's just an opinion there. The offensive line, though, I think is where the real hay can be made for the Steelers in trying to be better than what the 2015 Broncos won that eventually went on to win the Super Bowl championship. But, when you look at that offensive line, they had a lot of veterans and younger players, but they weren't like the high pedigree type offensive linemen. A lot of guys were drafted super late, in the 6th round. Guys were bouncing around teams. There wasn't a sense of the pedigree that the Steelers have put into finding their offensive line in the future, like Zach Frazier, like Broderick Jones, like Troy Fautanu, like Mason McCormick. I think there's a good chance the Steelers could be a better offensive line this year with all those young players than they were than the Broncos were with their guys back then, which could again go to helping keep Aaron Rodgers upright. But the defense is where the kicker is going to come, because if you're comparing the 2015 Broncos defense to the 2025 Steelers, that's where things can get tricky, because that Broncos defense was so nasty. Malik Jackson was a nasty dude up front on the defensive line. Their strength of the defense was their edge rushers, Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware. Now, I think that's the one place where the Steelers can easily negate it, because they got T.J. Watt. And I'd say T.J. Watt is worth a 2015 Von Miller. And it's important to remember Von Miller was the reason they won a Super Bowl that year. He was just terrorizing offensive backfields time and time again. And that was a big part of it. But I think that T.J. Watt is like an equivalent of Von Miller in this situation, where they're both prime edge rushers. DeMarcus Ware, a legendary edge rusher across from him, but I think Alex Highsmith does a pretty good job of his job, so not really pushing back much there. And then when it comes to off-ball linebackers, they had 2 solid veterans, Brandon Marshall, Danny Trevathan, and I think that's what the Steelers kind of have already in Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, and eventually Cole Holcomb. But I think that the Steelers could have the more athletic guys and could end up being bigger roles in the defense. So it's about finding your spot and getting in where you fit in. But I think one place where the Broncos do beat out the Steelers pretty handily is the cornerback room, because the Steelers, their cornerback situation was still being worked on at the time. And the Broncos had Aqib Talib, Chris Harris, two guys were two of the better cornerbacks in the NFL at the time. They were pretty solid there. They also had Bradley Roby in the slot and then in the slot covering the nickel. So you look at that and you compare it to the Steelers of right now. Okay, maybe there's a little bit more juice to the Broncos secondary, but you look at what the Steelers have right now and you think, can they compare? Can they compete? I think so, because when you look at what the Steelers do right now, they play defense and they have an offensive line that they're building around, trying to build the run game. And that may not be the most attractive thing to most people. They says, oh man, they're trying to follow this blueprint, but that is what worked for the Broncos. They ran the ball well, even without a high pedigree offensive line. And they were able to build things with that team. They were able to keep a defense together. It just kept getting after the quarterback. They kept working in unison. And I think that's where it's going to be interesting to see, can the Steelers match that kind of energy? And they still have a lot of guys to prove things. Keanu Benton needs to prove himself. Derek Harmon has to prove himself. All these guys are going to need to prove it. But I do think that there's a chance that the 2015 Broncos could have more similarities with the 2025 Steelers as time moves on, as far as how we see these teams develop in what they're doing. So with that being said, I think that's a very good question from Steve, talking about how Aaron Rodgers and his situation, could it be like Peyton Manning's, where Peyton Manning was very much a passenger in that Super Bowl. I don't think that Aaron Rodgers will be a passenger this year, but I do think that there's going to be a time where where the defense is going to be what carries, and that certainly happened a lot for Peyton Manning in his last year, and I think that Aaron Rodgers might benefit from that as well, because we've seen other people like Kenny Pickett benefit from it when they played for the Steelers. But that's our show here today for the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky. Same handle everywhere on all social media apps, at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here tomorrow with another episode on the Locked On Steelers podcast right here